Now, playing a great video game that enriches your life and brings you joy is a wonderful thing, but that pleasure can turn to tired misery when you go online to read the absolute torrent of abuse that's being unjustly leveled at something that you like. Now, it's no secret that the internet thrives on negative hyperbole, and so the fans of these 10 video games, almost all of them generally well received by critics, will find themselves constantly qualifying their love for these titles. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games you constantly have to defend loving. Number 10. The Last of Us Part 2. It's probably fair to call The Last of Us Part 2 the Star Wars The Last Jedi of video games, in that the discourse surrounding the title has become so exhaustingly contentious and vitriolic that even those who love it might also feel tired of it. Naughty Dog's long-awaited survival horror sequel received predominantly rave reviews from critics and scooped more Game of the Year awards than any other title in 2020, but the player response, well, it was considerably more polarizing. Many fans took umbrage with the game's boldest creative decision, namely, and here's a big spoiler, killing Joel in the first few hours and later switching control to his killer, Abby, for roughly half of the game. And as we all know, haters are considerably more vocal than lovers. For anyone who found The Last of Us Part 2 story laudably envelope-pushing in tandem with its superbly tight gameplay, it remains an absolute chore to discuss and stick up for. Passionate fans of basically any popular IP have a tendency to get a very specific idea in their heads of how a story should play out, and if it doesn't, well, they can't handle it. Now, that's not to say that everyone who hated The Last of Us Part 2 just didn't get it, but there are so many disingenuous, bad faith takes about this game that its cheerleaders tend to keep quiet and avoid the tiresome dialogue altogether. Number 9. Resident Evil 6. Now, if you ask most Resident Evil fans what the worst mainline entry into the series is, they will tell you that it is Resident Evil 6. And you know what? They are right, because I don't like this game. You know, it was wildly overblown, it was overstuffed, it was a mess of a game that tried to cater to both fans of Resident Evil 5's gonzo action and those who favored the series' survival horror roots. But you know what? There are absolutely many defenders of this game who admire its fearless go-for-broke excess, offering up 4 mini-campaigns totaling a ridiculous 20+ hours in length. I can't deny there's certainly plenty of bang for your buck here, with the game approximating a comically bombastic Michael Bay movie in some of its greatest moments, even if it is unarguably an exhausting experience in its entirety. Yet, if you can look past the overall skittishness, the melee combat is remarkably advanced, despite the game explaining it terribly, and embraced as the schlocky B-movie it is, there is certainly a lot to enjoy here. But you can basically see most fans' temperament change the second you try to argue that Capcom knew exactly what they were doing with this game, and that it's one of the best-selling entries in the series for a reason. Like I said, I don't like it, but so many other people do, and good on ya. Number 8. Mass Effect 3. The best argument you can make about Mass Effect 3 is that the journey is more important than the destination. For though fans were understandably upset by the game's flatly underwhelming pick-a-color ending, does that entirely invalidate dozens, even hundreds of hours of play prior? Put that train wreck of an ending to the back of your mind, and Mass Effect 3 touts a riveting story and top-tier combat, yet ultimately any discussion about the game's merits quickly loops back around to how terrible its finale turned out. A big part of the problem in trying to defend this game is that fans aren't really ready to talk about the third game in isolation. The ending tainted their perception of the entire series, and so they take it far more personally than a single game failing to stick the landing. As much as BioWare undeniably screwed the pooch at the final hurdle, that shouldn't instantly eradicate hours and hours of fantastic time spent with the game and the series as a whole. Number 7. Final Fantasy X-2. Now, Final Fantasy X-2 is such a Marmite type of game. Some love it and some loathe it. I personally, drumroll please, I absolutely love it. It's so dumb. I can't help but love how silly this game is. Following up from the smash hit of Final Fantasy X, many took umbrage with the fact that the spin-off was considerably more lighthearted in tone. And of course, there are some that are predisposed to hate the game for simply daring to feature an all-female cast of protagonists. Oh, how dare they! Yet compared to the self-serious portent of most Final Fantasy games, X-2 is a major breath of fresh air. It's a silly, campy JRPG that begins with Yuna performing a devilishly catchy J-pop tune, and centers its battle system around costume changes and even features a totally deranged massage minigame. Expectations may have been part of the problem here, because anyone hoping for a more serious-minded epilogue to Final Fantasy X likely had no idea what to do with such a supremely unapologetically goofy game. But as a daring riposte to the exhaustingly convoluted, navel-gazing nature of most entries in the series, X-2 is as close as a Final Fantasy has ever gotten to being outright self-parody. Unsurprisingly, a lot of ride-or-die fans of the series didn't care much to hear that opinion. Number 6. Days Gone. Now, Days Gone is ultimately a game that went over far better with players than it did with critics, but there's still far from unanimous player support for the critically maligned open-world zombie game. Released with the expectation that it hit the same polished, impeccably crafted standard of most AAA Sony exclusive, Days Gone instead received mixed reviews for its generic open-world gameplay, mediocre story, uninteresting protagonist, and bloated campaign. And while most of the criticisms aren't without truth, Days Gone does nevertheless offer up a fun sandbox for players to cause absolute chaos in, all while they pay cursory attention to the so-so plot and characters. But because so many view Metacritic scores as an objective emblem of a game's quality and value, though, fans trying to argue its merits will regularly be rebuked that it fell short of expectations. The problem really is that Days Gone should have never been marketed as the next AAA Sony hotness. A studio of Blend's wildly mixed caliber was never going to turn in a refined masterpiece of a game, but that didn't mean that it isn't a blast to play in the moment. It does admittedly help that many of the bugs the game was rightfully dinged for at launch have since been fixed, but as the saying goes, first impressions, well, they count for a lot. Number 5. Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots. Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots was one of the most eagerly awaited games of the PS3's lifecycle, touted as the swan song for the franchise protagonist Solid Snake. The result is a game that wowed critics but kind of split fans right down the middle. To some, Hideo Kojima's self-indulgent storytelling tendencies reached an unbearable peak, or nadir even, due to the game's almost parody-long cutscenes and truly unhinged fan service-soaked story that never once exercised restraint. Some fans also disliked the game's heavy reliance on using nanomachines to explain and demystify previously ambiguous elements of the series' lore, many comparing it to the midichlorians reveal in Star Wars The Phantom Menace. Yet Metal Gear Solid 4's gameplay was virtually peerless for its time, which combined with an array of creative boss battles and a story which brought Snake's arc to an emotional, if rather ridiculous end, made it one of the most ambitious video games of its era. While not everything it does is going to work for everyone, it delivers a thunderously entertaining collision of fan service and cutting-edge gameplay in a technically sublime, unapologetically messy package. And the thing is, when some people point out the narrative inconsistencies, they're generally not wrong, but your overall opinion on Metal Gear Solid 4 likely depends on how much you care about that. The emotional heft of this game triumphs over its messy storytelling moments. Number 4. Dark Souls 2. Though Dark Souls 2 received rave reviews from most critics, fans were decidedly more divided, many feeling that the departure of the prior series director Hidetaka Miyazaki, combined with the strained development amid a tight production schedule, caused the game to be compromised in many areas. Now, this definitely lacks the refinement of its direct predecessor, but Dark Souls 2 is still a damn great piece of work by any conventional metric, packed with some of From Software's most fiendishly difficult boss fights to date, although that might be down to the rather wonky hitboxes, but never, who's to say? Who's to say? There's also the agreeable inclusion of a robust fast travel system, which compensates somewhat for the game's messier overall design. Sure, it was developed by FromSoft's, and this is their words, B team, because the A team were making Bloodborne at the same time, but any other franchise would be thrilled to have a game this good amongst its ranks. Sometimes it's important to remind FromSoft fans that their expectations for the studio's games, well, they are sky high, and even awful Dark Souls games are still actually great, believe it or not. Number 3. Grand Theft Auto 4. Now, Grand Theft Auto 4 remains one of the most eagerly awaited video games in history, and despite posting rave reviews and magnificent sales, its legacy is a bit of a complicated one. For everyone who loves its gritty style and focus on realism, there's somebody who sorely misses the more cartoonish silliness of Vice City and San Andreas, not to mention that GTA 4's map size was considerably smaller than the latter's. But GTA 4 also marks a point at which the series transitioned into true prestige gaming territory, with a more serious-minded story and pointedly satirical overtone, and yet many fans still resent it for both not being San Andreas 2.0 and getting summarily outdone by the grandiose Grand Theft Auto 5, dismissing it as an awkward lame duck entry into the franchise. This is of course to totally devalue everything Rockstar put into GTA 4, a game that took bold risks when it could have just clung to the franchise formula and likely been just as commercially successful. Is this the best game in the series? Absolutely not, but it's tough not to get irked when folks call it terrible with a straight face. I mean, who are you kidding? Come on. Number 2. DMC Devil May Cry. A lot of Devil May Cry fans would simply prefer not to even acknowledge the existence of 2013's reboot DMC, especially as the experimental retooling never got a sequel and Capcom eventually returned to the original iteration of Dante. DMC is a game that scored surprisingly solid reviews from critics despite the avalanche of pre-release hate for its reworked emo rendition of Dante, and it's just as well. Sure, the new Dante design pales in comparison to the classic version, and the game's edgy tones certainly won't work for everyone, but where it matters most, aka the gameplay, shows that DMC is an absolute banger. It's not as challenging as its predecessors, but DMC is a thrillingly breezy hack-and-slash character action game best thought of as a fun adjacent to the mainline series, and one not nearly worthy of the petty vitriol that it's still festooned with, no matter that fans eventually got their Devil May Cry back. Express even mild positivity towards DMC and you're apparently earmarking yourself as a filthy casual fan of the series, and that is just wrong. Because yes, there's a lot to dislike about how the game was made and obviously its tone, but come on, that gameplay is just so good. And number 1, Batman Arkham Knight. Now, Batman Arkham Knight may have been kneecapped from the get-go with its disastrously botched PC launch, but if you take many fan comments at face value, it's as though the game personally came round to their house and pissed in their cereal. Arkham Knight is certainly rougher around the edges than the series' best entry, Arkham City. I mean, the Batmobile isn't great, and the big narrative reveal is totally obvious, but the moment-to-moment wish-fulfillment appeal of playing as the Dark Knight nevertheless remains. Between the muscular combat, gorgeous visuals, and ultra-atmospheric depiction of Gotham, Arkham Knight is a great Batman game that was unlucky enough to just come at the end of a quality run of Batman games released within a 6-year period. As superhero games go, it deserves to be discussed with the best, even if it is assuredly more of a flawed banger than either Arkham Asylum or the best Arkham City. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video games you constantly have to defend loving. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming and Warhammer battle reports outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. I am going to defend you, my friend. You deserve some love, because you are a massive ledge. You deserve all of the best things in life, like love, happiness, and success, and don't let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. Alright, I want you to go out there and absolutely smash it today. You're a big ledge. I believe in you. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.